welcome to this memorial to celebrate the life of Robert Endean and to mourn his passing in the company of Anne, Ray, Coralie and Stephen, their family and friends. I am deeply moved to have been asked to moderate this ceremony. I've known Bob since 1962 when I worked with him and Owen Jones on the development of the Heron Island Research Station. He was of that generation of Australians whose adult life emerged in the immediate post-war, the generation who first felt the special nature of being Antipodean. He had a highly developed philosophy of real value, which he expressed with enthusiasm and gusto. For many reasons, we will remember him and miss his rare and precious individuality. Coralie Endean is now going to speak to you on behalf of the family and many friends and associates.
My father was a remarkable man. People will talk today about the depth of him and what he contributed to the scientific community. I'm going to just say a few words about the breadth of him. My father had a gold mine. He had dreams of striking the mother lode and becoming richer than Scrooge McDuck. He spent hours bent to the pickaxe and even more time defending his territory from marauding gold pirates. My father had a pastoral enterprise. He ran Bradford cattle, of which he was immensely proud, and the occasional milker to which he was emotionally attached. He spent days in the saddle recapturing escapees. My father was an idealist. He was a knight in shining armour who fought the forces of darkness with missionary zeal. Of him people had this to say. John Pern, Secretary of the Medical Alumni. Bob's influence on science, and specifically marine science, has influenced so many of us over the last 4 decades. His role in outreach for the preservation of the Great Barrier Reef, his work as one of Australia's pioneers in marine science as we would now understand the term, and his teaching and encouragement of so many has been an example to us all. Former student Lyndon DeBantier. I can only say that I feel fortunate to have known Bob as well as I did, and to have had the opportunity of learning and interacting with someone of his knowledge, stature, commitment and honesty. His insights and understanding of reef ecology were orders of magnitude greater than virtually everyone else I've ever met in this field. The world is a poorer place for his passing. Harley Bradbury. Bob always seemed cast in granite, so it's hard to imagine him gone. I'm sure that his passion for science, however, will remain in his students. It was then that I began to think. I thought of the unbroken string of students my father has taken on over the years, and I wasn't so sad, because somehow I felt my father will live on in them. As former student Ross Duncan said, I learnt more from him than coral stuff. If we can get some North to Alaska. Just going to sing North to Alaska all together if we could.
Tim, Helen, Ian and Tom are going to come down now and lead the singing, and we'd like you to do that with the same enthusiasm and gusto that Bob would have done.
In other words, you don't have to be in key.
We need lots of help.
Well, we do need lots of help. Wendy, come up to the microphone. Wendy.
Not me.
Yeah. Come on.
Okay, ready?
Ready? Set.
Go.
Big
Sam left Seattle in the year of 92 with George Pratt, his partner, and brother Billy too. They crossed the Yukon River and found the Bonanza Gold beneath that old white mountain just a little east of Nome. Sam crossed the majestic mountains to the valley far below. He talked to his team of huskies as he marched on through the snow. But the northern lights are running wild in the land of the midnight sun. Yes, Sam McCord was a mighty man in the year of 91. Where the river is winding, big nuggets they're finding. North to Alaska, go north, the rush is on. George turned to Sam with his gold in his hands. Then Sam, you're looking at lonely man. And you're looking at a lonely, lonely man. I'll trade all the gold that's buried in this land for one small band of gold to place on sweet little Jenny's hand. 'Cause a man needs a woman to love him all the time. Remember, Sam, a true love is so hard to find. I'd build for my Jenny a honeymoon home below that old white mountain just a little southeast of Nome. Where the river is winding, big nuggets they're finding. North to Alaska, go north, the rush is on.
Then we fall over. It's awful.
Now we will hear from the local laureate, Peter James.
We come here today to remember Bob Endean and to honour his memory. Fill high the bowl with Samian wines. On Boona's hills and Heron's shore there was a remnant of a line such as the Doric mothers bore. So Byron might have described him, a Greek hero for our time, a man who combined the best of scientific research, athletic prowess and bravery, academic pursuits and physical labour on the farm and on the mine, a scientist, a farmer, an adventurer, a human being, a fighter, right to the end. He's going to leave many of us without that quality of leadership which came through his integrity. For integrity in his science, I think, was one of his most outstanding attributes. A search for truth, untarnished by the pressures of modern mores and politics. He leaves us that legacy. How heavy do I journey on the way when what I seek, my weary travels end, doth teach that ease and that repose to say, thus far the miles are measured from my friend. Born on the South Maitland coalfields, where his father was a mine surveyor and later supervisor, his childhood was spent in a bush setting, exploring and hunting rabbits, and he remained very much a bushie right throughout his life. He also stole watermelons. He used to tell of an occasion when he and some other boys skipped Sunday school to do so. The wrath of the deity was already apparent in the stormy sky. And when lightning struck the barbed wire fence as one boy was getting through, I think he was later Commissioner of Police in New South Wales. Anyway, he was struck by lightning and laid out. There was no more to be said. Needless to say, after that convincing demonstration of the deity's displeasure, Bob became a regular at Sunday school. On another occasion, over some other boyish pranks, his father conspired with the local police sergeant to lock Bob up overnight in jail and feed him on bread and water. Perhaps that experience made him attend to his studies. Anyway, his outstanding marks at school eventually led to a scholarship at New England University and later a Sydney gold medal, which is hard to top, Sydney University gold medal. In those years, of course, study was not his only concern. It was punctuated by a short spell in the Air Force, which he never spoke about. But Coralie tells me, while he was okay in the air, he always had difficulty in landing without crumpling the undercarriage. So that wasn't a great success. But he received official recognition for exceptional rescue work in the 1949 Kempsey floods. And about that time taking part in another rescue for a little boy lost in the New England Ranges, which was later celebrated in song. It was a little bit less successful for Bob, and another search party had to be sent out to find him. But his bravery was never lacking when put to the test. During the infamous cyclone at Heron Island in 1969, Bob Polson, the island skipper, took the ship out to ride out the cyclone at sea. He motored up to the island until he saw the reef on his echo finder and drifted back, and he did this for a day or two until he began to run out of fuel. It was Bob Endean's idea and execution to take out an improvised surf boat into the cyclone loaded with plastic bottles of fuel, thereby saving the day. But that jumps ahead a little bit. After his graduation, he worked for a time with Professor Dakin at Sydney University, then took up his position at Queensland University, where he later got his PhD and where he stayed until his retirement earlier this decade. This was where I first met Bob in 1970. It was a time when he was reaching celebrity status over the Crown of Thorns controversy. And now, since this matter imposed itself so much on his life, I think a few words are in order. In the late 60s, he had been commissioned to do a report on the Crown of Thorns and its sudden appearance in plague proportions on the Great Barrier Reef. He did the fundamental research on the animal and presented a comprehensive report, which incidentally, in my view, hasn't been greatly advanced in the decades since. To this stage, everything was done in good faith. But it was not long before the forces of darkness gathered. Why? Was it worries about effects of tourism on the reef, oil drilling on the reef, professional jealousies, or just plain political narkedness? Whatever the reason, after that report, the official line chose to believe not the report, not the scientists with the greatest knowledge of reef ecology, but spear fishermen and tourist operators. The Endean hypothesis came to be seen as a wicked over-dramatisation of true facts. And that ethos still exists, by the way. Anyone who saw the obituary in the Courier Mail last Saturday might have puzzled over the suggestion that Dr. Endean kicked against conventional wisdom. Well, his was the conventional wisdom, not the rest was political expediency. Now that the predictions made by Bob Endean on the starfish are at last being accepted in scientific circles, it's strange to look back on the 70s, when the whole scientific community became tinted by the debate, when meetings of the once amiable Great Barrier Reef Committee became battlegrounds, and blame was levied at Bob Endean for bringing to the public notice a topic as unsavoury as our part, as humans, in the starfish plagues. This should have been swept under the carpet or under the waves of the Pacific, in homage to the forces of the marketplace. And there are plenty of parallels of this interface between science and politics, which I won't go into now, but I think we all know of them, like the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco at a time when they were trying to attract settlers in California, and the powers that be in San Francisco decided they could handle a fire which came out of the earthquake, but an earthquake might be too much, so they tried to suppress evidence of the earthquake, even to the extent of touching up photographs with rubble in the street. Same thing. Anyway, it was a difficult period for Bob in those years, throughout years of professional and personal crises, but he was lucky to have support. I refer here to Anne Cameron, who's another fighter, and anyone should be so lucky to have Anne for a supporter and a friend, and Bob had her love too. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh with the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes bewail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances forgone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan, which I new pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. In his later decades, Bob was to have another good mate in his daughter Coralie. Some here were lucky enough to see the play he wrote for Coralie as a preliminary to her wedding to Stephen, and it presented on his 70th birthday. It almost, or one could be excused for thinking that he missed his true vocation as a playwright. And I can also remember carefree times. On Friday evenings in the James Birrell Bar, Bob would often relate his latest troubles with trips to the reef, or with his gold mine at Murphy's Creek, or with the farm at Boona. There, at the farm, he had an itinerant bull, not satisfied with the restrictions of its own herd. The bull would break out and impregnate neighbouring farmers' cows without their permission, which didn't please the farmers who wanted cows for dairy production and not meat. Or there would be a story of his latest farm accident, up a windmill when the wind changed and the tail knocked him off to the ground. Another occasion he fell in a deep tank in the earth and had to climb out or stay there for weeks. And once, on yet another occasion, trying to break up a fight of dogs in his front seat, he ran into a tree on Gold Creek Road and spent the next 3 months in traction, uncomplaining. For years he spent his weekdays at the university, Saturdays on the farm, Sundays at the gold mine. His energy for life was impressive, and he enjoyed it all to the full. The reef, of course, was his home away from home, where his research on reef ecology and on toxins has received world recognition and has benefited mankind with new drugs. And perhaps it was fitting, if ever such a moment can be fitting, that his last days were spent there on Heron Island. I'd like to finish with a poem by John Masefield, who wrote so much about the sea. It seems to suit Bob Endean's nostalgia for both the sea and his rural past. It's the idea of animus rivertendi, the spirit returning to the place of his birth, as he did to the region of his birth. It's a warm wind of the west wind, full of birds' cries. I never hear the west wind, but the tears are in my eyes, for it comes from the westlands, the old brown hills, and April's in the west wind, and daffodils. It's a fine land, the west land, for hearts as tired as mine. Apple orchards blossom there, and the air's like wine. And there's cool green grass there, where men may lie at rest, and thrushes are in song there, fluting from the nest. Will ye not come home, brother? You've been long away. It's April, and blossom time, and white as the May, and bright as the sun, brother, warm as the rain. Will ye not come home, brother, home to us again? Larks are singing in the west, brother, above the green wheat. So will you not come home, brother, and rest your tired feet? I've a balm for bruised hearts, brother, sleep for aching eyes, says the west wind, the warm wind, full of birds' cries. Dr. Robert Endean.
Thank you, Peter, for that fine address. We will now hear from others, and Rob Ferron, if he would come forward, has messages from students and colleagues, which he will address you with.
My last year as a student, as an undergraduate student at this university, coincided with Bob's last year as an unretired lecturer. I say this because his lectures continued into his retirement. He was a good lecturer because he always talked very slowly. Friends have told me that about a first level lecture that Bob used to perform every year, I say perform, he would walk into the lab into the lecture theatre with a homogenizer, a blender, and chuck in what appeared to be a green frog, turn on the blender and hold up the mush that was left, and he'd say, "There, this is why you're studying zoology. We have every bit of a frog in here, but do we have a frog? No." And that was really the way that Bob worked. He looked at the big picture all the time. I came to know Bob better as a postgrad student of Anne Cameron's. Whenever I became tiresome to her, she would send me to him to be sorted out. He'd always start these sorting out talks with, "Yep, well," but then he'd always continue in a manner that was very erudite to discuss any aspect of coral reef ecology or toxinology that I could put to him. And he always, right up into his retirement to the last days, kept up to date and abreast of new developments. I owe him a great deal, and I know some of his ex-students and some colleagues feel the same way, and I have some messages from them here. From Russell Reichelt in Townsville: "I was saddened to hear of Bob's passing last week, but pleased to hear he was on Heron Island when it happened. I'm sure he would have enjoyed being on the reef that he loved. There are too many tales to tell of Bob, all of them heartwarming and most of them true, but his love for the reef was matched only by his tremendous knowledge about how it works. I'm lucky enough to have Anne Cameron to have had Anne Cameron as my supervisor. She is the best teacher, bar none, that I have ever met, and a good friend of Bob's for as long as I've known both of them. I offer Anne my deepest sympathy, and if I was there I would insist on knocking back several beers with Anne and swapping some good stories about Bob to mark the occasion. Bob would have wanted nothing less. He was a great person and enriched the lives of his friends. Goodbye, Bob. From Lyndon Llewellyn, I can see Bob striding out across heaven's Great Barrier Reef, St. Peter trying hard to keep up, and all the time, Bob, you're pointing out to him the wonders of nature's handiwork. I finally understood last week what an impact you had on my life. You created a dedicated band of scientists to carry out your favourite pursuits, science and life. I'm honoured to be one of them. From Helen Fox in America. There's probably little that I could add that hasn't already been said about Bob. He truly had a heart of gold, though I'm sure part of it was 4X gold. As a simple-minded research assistant coming from America for a year, I had much to learn. I knew if Bob started chuckling that I'd done something wrong. So in this manner, I learned to brew tea properly, to navigate the trek to and from the Reef Crest plot, to avoid getting scraped off the back of a horse, and to head to the bar after coming in from the field. All this extra knowledge Bob gave freely. I was happy just to be learning coral identification from one of the great names in reef science whose papers I had read as a student in university. In my mind's eye, I can still see him searching through the TARDIS of his bag, or cramming his hat firmly on his head against the sun or wind, or laughing and telling stories at the bar. For the warmth, humour and kindness that Bob and Anne shared with me, I will always be grateful. Bob will continue to be terribly missed, but having touched the lives of hundreds or thousands, including mine, he cannot be forgotten. And finally, from some colleagues of Bob's, Joe Burnett, Peter Fenner and John Williamson. The messages from John Williamson. We three wish to pay homage and tribute to Bob Endean. Joe knew him better than Peter or me, but Bob was an original, a one-off, scientifically astute and with great integrity. With Bob, you knew where you stood, and he always had the courage to proclaim the truth, no matter how unpopular it was at the time. He leaves a gap. I have to thank him for focusing my mind on more than one occasion. He emanated inquiry and precision, and I know we speak for many. We believe his true scientific worth will take some years to evaluate and appreciate, and we three, along with many others, stand forever in his debt. And they call themselves the International Consortium for Jellyfish Stings. I don't think anyone could say anything other than that. His students were very pleased to have known Bob, and he does leave a gap in all our lives, both for his integrity and his knowledge.
Thank you, Robert. If there are any others that wish to speak of Bob, would they please come forward? You want to go?
I too have some messages. Ken Scott in biochemistry sent his condolences. He was unable to be here today. Shane Lavery from postdocing in Harvard, wishing to express his sadness. A letter from personal note of sympathy from John Pern to colleagues in the Department of Zoology, referring to the extent to which Bob's work has been influential in mammalian toxicology. And a letter from Professor Jiro Kikawa. Jiro is unable to be here today because he has a speaking engagement in Tokyo today. I'd like to read part of his letter. It was a great shock to us all at the gathering of the Australian Coral Reef Society on Heron Island to learn that Bob Endean had passed away. Reading the abstract of the keynote address he was going to deliver at the meeting, Bob's thinking at the time was right in the centre of the key ecological issue for coral reef science. His early work on low isles Heron in the 1950s generated conceptual models of spacing which he later elaborated with proposed mechanisms through his work on acanthaster and biotoxins, and for which he himself now set out to collect evidence in the field. His clear scientific vision we shall see no more. Bob was not only an outstanding scientist, but also a great teacher at all levels of communication. We shall miss him immensely. I'd also like to say a few things on a personal note. I knew Bob as my lecturer in 1963, as a staff member for a couple of years when I returned to the University of Queensland, and as a neighbour in the top end of the Gold Creek Valley. As my lecturer, he made echinoderms seem absolutely fascinating. I also sought advice from him at the end of second year and asked his advice about whether or not I should go on and do zoology. I was trying to decide at the time between zoology and geology. I didn't know of his passion for gold mining, but that might have influenced his answer. He strongly encouraged me to do geology and told me that if I did zoology, I'd never get a job or make any money. He was partly correct. He also there was always an air of mystery about Bob, which we speculated on as undergraduate students. Had he really been a professional boxer? And did he really ride the wall of death, ride the motorbike in a wall of death at a travelling show? I'm not sure I entirely know the truth of these matters even now. As a staff member, Bob urged me to keep the department firmly, or to keep the areas of cytology and histology firmly alive within the department. And as a neighbour, we always knew that we could rely on Bob not only for assistance if we got into some sort of trouble, but pretty good advice about how high the creek might go and whether we should put our vehicle on the far side of it just yet, and how deep it was above your knees before it was too deep to wade home. He also spent a couple of nights at our place last year when my wife and I were in the United Kingdom. My daughter, unfortunately, during this occasion, it was the end. I think he drank the remaining homebrew, and after the homebrew was drunk, the creek was surprisingly low enough for him to cross again to get home. I was also honoured to be a player in the play that Peter referred to. Most recently, I remember Bob as someone I saw frequently walking his dog up and down Gold Creek Road. And I think that's the way I like to remember him. We'll miss him a lot.
My name is Noel Haysom. I'm one of Bob's very early students at the university here. I can't remember when I was lectured to by him. It was probably at 48 or 49 or something. Also, I was one who didn't always see eye to eye with him about crown of thorn starfish. On the other hand, it was as a result of a report that I wrote and a recommendation that I made that he finished up actually involved in the crown of thorns. So perhaps if I hadn't made that report, he may have been spared a lot of trauma over the years. That's, however, not the main reason why I wanted to come up here and say a few words. Bob and I were two of the foundation members of the Cecil Club, along with a number of other well-known people at the university and various other